My name is Liz Mangus, literacy specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. We are so thrilled to have another great webinar for you this week, and we're happy that you're able to join us. As usual, as you're logging in, locate your control bar. I know you already know where your control bar is because we've been doing the Zoom thing for like 2+ years, but still, just in case, your control bar is at the bottom of your web browser window, and that is where you will find the chat, the Q&A, and the live transcript icons. We will want you to chat with us today. So if you could go to the chat right now, go ahead, click on it, go to the drop down and select everyone, and then just type in there, let us know where you are joining us from. If you have questions today during the session, you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A area. And if you would like to take advantage of subtitles, you will have to go ahead and click on live transcript and then select show subtitles. So we'll get started right at 3 o'clock Eastern time. Quick reminder, we are on Twitter. Saddleback is on Twitter, and our presenters today are on Twitter. We have Sarah Otto joining us and Dalila Mendoza, and they are very wonderful, and they're going to share some great stuff with us today. But go ahead, give us a shout out and follow us on Twitter. We always appreciate that. So let's see what time it is. All right, we got about 2 minutes until start time. Let me go over here to the chat. Hi, Robert. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Laura. If you're just joining us, if you could go to the chat, let us know where you are joining us from. We always love to see that. So let's say hi to our guests, Sarah and Dalila. How are you both? Thank you for being here.
Hey, Liz.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fantastic. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Texas, and a lot of Texas folks joining us today. Hi, Catherine in Southern Virginia. Hello, Pedro in McAllen. Hello, Lisa in Kansas. Welcome, everybody. Home stretch for some of us in terms of the school year. If you are wrapping up the school year this week or next week, let us know in the chat. Or if you have to hang on till mid-June, let us know that too, because I know no matter where you are counting down the days. You are ready to wrap this school year up, get a break, and start fresh next year, hopefully. North Carolina joining us. Welcome. All right. Oh, Robert's already dropped a question in the Q&A. He's ready for us.
Go, Robert.
All right, Robert. Robert's on the ball. He comes to almost all the webinars and he comes prepared. He is ready to learn.
I think Robert was at the webinar that I was at last year. This sounds like a very similar question. Robert, your name looks familiar. Have you learned or studied about the teacher-centered teaching that East Asian ESL students have had with a focus on memorizing and less on critical thinking due to the Confucian hierarchical education approach? Say that 10 times fast.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
So we'll be, of course, Robert, will be addressing your question as we go throughout the session today. And just a reminder to those of you who are signing in right now, if you have questions, go ahead and follow Robert's lead and put those right in the Q&A area, and we will address those as we can. And then we'll take some time at the end as well to make sure that we get all of the questions answered. All right, it is about that time to get started. So our topic today is boosting metalinguistic awareness for our multilingual learners. We want to go beyond translation, right? So joining us, we have, I'm going to do quick intros here so we can get started. We have returning to the webinar series, Sarah Otto, who is the founder, CEO, and director of professional learning at Confianza and the author of The Language Lens. Check it out. And we also have Dalila Mendoza joining us. She is the director of the Multilingual Learner Program in Taunton Public Schools. So welcome to you both. We're very glad to have you. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and let you take it from here.
Thank you, Liz.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, whether you're here live or whether you're joining us later in the archive. I'm going to go ahead and get things going here on my end. So again, welcome everyone. Really excited. That's me and Dalila. We're just so excited about this topic. We're really passionate about it. We have a lot of things to say and hopefully a lot of things to hear from the chat and from the Q&A from all of you. Yes, the topic is going beyond translation and really thinking about strategies to boost metalinguistic awareness for our multilingual learners. And so let's just dive right in. Hopefully today you'll leave here with some tangible ways by looking at some really concrete examples of how to do this work. And as you can see, this is a language objective, right, Dalila? We love language objectives, so we always want to have them in our professional development as well.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, so you'll be able to interact with us in the chat again, and also we're going to be sharing examples. This is not about theory per se, but about how do we make the theory come alive. Just a little background about where this is coming from. Confianza is happy to collaborate with Saddleback. This, as Liz said, is my second webinar. This is Dalila's first. She's my guest here today, and she can tell you a little bit more about what her relationship is with Confianza, but I am just very passionate about, as you can see, equity, language, and literacy. That's our whole tagline. And we've had the good fortune of working for years now with Taunton Public Schools. Isn't that right, Dalila?
That's right. And it's been wonderful. We've worked on many things, but I think one of the biggest aha moments I feel in our district is in when Meta-Linguistic Awareness, when I educated myself more on it, and the contrastive analysis. So that has brought a lot of power to the students in learning the English language. So I'm excited to speak about that a little bit more.
And I'm so excited to hear you speak about that. And I'm just thrilled that we have so many people here ready to listen. And so let's get into it. First of all, we wanted to say that we have a blog that we wrote this spring on the same exact topic. And so the blog link should come up in the chat in a little while from Liz. And you can also find it just directly by going to our website at ellconfianza.com and then going to find the blog. As you can see, it has the same title as this webinar because we are very passionate about this. It's a big question that we get both as teacher educators and as educators, supporting students and teachers alike and leaders alike too. It's like, well, can we just use Google Translate, right? And there's like, that is one tool and there are other translation tools out there, but we know that we want to, again, as Dalila said, get into really tapping into students' power around what the language they do have. And really try to bring that to life, as you'll see here. So if you're interested, that blog is available for you. We'll shoot it down in the chat later in the webinar. So if you miss it now and you want to just focus, no problem. But that is available for you to think about and to use both in your own learning, but also feel free to use anything that we're sharing in your own professional learning community in your school or district. And so without further ado, I will have Dalila take us through the next part of our session today.
Thank you, Sarah. So when I say the aha moment that I had, it was really connecting to my experiences, and it really made sense to me when metalinguistic awareness, what it meant and what contrastive analysis meant. And the reason why it really was that big moment for me is I'm a second language learner. And my parents are immigrants from the Azores, Portugal, and they've always been very proud of our culture, of our language. Portuguese was my first language. But what I found was I was in the bilingual program. It was segregated. We weren't treated very fairly. And by the time I went into the gen ed setting, the general setting, I didn't want anybody to know that I spoke Portuguese. I wanted to be English only because none of my my experiences were ever tapped into. I wasn't empowered. One big example that I always give to my teachers is that my parents went through the dictatorship was overthrown in Portugal, and the 25th of April, which we say 25 de Abril, is a big deal in my culture. And for me to understand history here in America and to be empowered about what my parents went through and everything that they talked about at home, I would have been a little bit more not as scared to be a second language learner, not as scared to be Portuguese. Now, I scream it top of the rooftops that I'm Portuguese and it's my first language, and how proud I am to be. But in in learning about metalinguistic awareness and contrastive analysis, I just feel this is a great way, a simple way to tap into the knowledge that the students already have, and empower them in their language, and just bridging that with the new language that they're learning.
It's so wonderful to hear your story, Dalila. Every time I hear it, I always think of, new pieces about how it's so easy to not see what's not. It's so easy to miss what's not there. In other words, you might not see it. Your teachers might not have seen or really known to tap into that. And so we're trying to prevent that from happening, right? We're trying to help educate. It's kind of sort of our mission, educate teachers to say there might be more below the surface than you see. And so if you have a student who, is speaking English, you might not realize they're multilingual or bilingual. And also, as you said, bicultural, I think, is one of the pieces I'm taking away today from your story. So
yes,
important.
and I feel like the culture piece is huge, because the culture can change. Some of us speak the same language, but our cultures are from different islands or different countries that speak the same language. So that culture piece is huge as well, in order to get that full identity of the student.
It really is. I know. And you and I both live out here and work mainly out here in New England, although Confianza works everywhere, but we're seeing just such a huge, continuous, a huge influx of students who do speak Portuguese, so have the same language as you, however, not necessarily from the Azores. So again, knowing where students come from, we have students from Cabo Verde that speak Portuguese, which is a different kind of Portuguese. We have students from Brazil and different kinds of different places in Brazil with different kinds of Portuguese there. It's really all about knowing your students, isn't it? And knowing and learning about the world, which is just one of my favorite things about working in the field of English as a second language or multilingual learner education. So we thought, with that in mind, that we would try to give you an experience, even if you are multilingual or bilingual yourself. We think it's really important for all of us to kind of step into students' experiences and try to understand what it can be like when you're faced with a new language. And so you are welcome to let us know if you know what language this is in the chat. Similar to Portuguese, this is a language, which I'll reveal in a couple minutes, that actually has several different versions, even though it's using the same alphabet. So we're going to go through an experience here of metalinguistic awareness before we kind of explain what it is and look at more examples. But just cold here, as you look at this, do you know what this says? Just looking at the text. I'm not going to read it to you yet. I'm just going to have you read it to yourself. And some people are saying, is it Russian, Ukrainian? Ooh, Cyrillic alphabet, says Robert Kim. So he is correct. This is the Cyrillic alphabet, which is not the alphabet that we use in English. We use the Roman alphabet, or often called the Latinic alphabet. So you're close. Nobody's got it yet, and that's okay. But what if I said what it is? And what if I put it in the alphabet that we might know in English, which would be pronounced like this? Zdravo, kako si? And you can try to say that on your own if you feel comfortable, if you feel so moved. We won't hear you. It's okay. Zdravo, Z-D-R. Wow. Zdravo. That's a phoneme we do not have in English. But as you can see, it's represented by these characters. And somebody else said Greek. Yeah, it's very similar. If you look at our blog, you're going to see a 3-part Venn diagram between the different alphabets that use these characters, which is fascinating. So this is the Latinic or Roman alphabet version of the same thing, right? So it's different, what we call script system or orthography, but it says the same thing. So you have to know how to read both. But if I say it, if I show it to you this way, you might have more connection, more bridging to your language of English, because you might recognize more letters here. Z-D-R-A-V-O, zdravo, zdravo kako si. Ah, yes. I see some conversation here in the chat, thinking it's very connected to Greek. So there's some contrastive analysis going on, bridging between. I'm going to give it away because I'm learning this language. And it is, yes, it is the Cyrillic alphabet, but it is Serbian or Serbo-Croatian, as some people know it. And it means hello, how are you? So zdravo, you could say that now if you know someone who who speaks it. And they might also recognize it in some of the similar languages like Ukrainian, as was brought up, Russian. How are you? Kakosi, right? So what is the brain doing when it sees a new language like that? And let's just go back to that real quick. We'll just go back and look at those characters. You're trying to figure out, do I recognize anything here? Okay, I think I see a B, I see an A, maybe some Ks. But these are characters I do not recognize. So your brain is looking for connections. The brain naturally looks for connections. That's what's so wonderful about having, the brain to learn with at any age, is the brain naturally looks for connections. And so again, even looking at it in the Latinic version, you're going to see that I can actually read this now. Zdravo. I can pronounce that, kakosi. And that's what we're talking about with metalinguistic awareness. We're talking about not just jumping to the English version in this case, but trying to think, what do I know, or what can I recognize, and try to bridge it. That's really what it is connecting from one language to another, and consciously. Okay, it's a conscious process, and we have to teach kids how to do that. And so I wanted to give you that experience, because this is what we want, again, to do in our classrooms. And this is an example here from a classroom where it's from a teacher that I work with in Milford, Massachusetts. Shout out to Christina Oliveri. And with her adolescent learners and alternative high school program, she's teaching them really specific strategies to boost their metalinguistic awareness. And she really wants them to use this cognitive process, right, to do different strategies. And again, you're going to see more examples of this here. One strategy that Dalila does a lot of in her district is called contrastive analysis, which is consciously saying, like Christina has here, do I recognize any parts of this? Do I recognize any letters? Can I guess? Do there any connections to my language? That is really important to compare and contrast, do that contrastive analysis between languages. I also want to talk about translanguaging, which is also under the umbrella of metalinguistic awareness. There's a history, if you're interested, where back, it was about 10 or so years ago, Sen Williams coined the term translanguaging to talk about a strategy that we can, again, teach kids to do, to sort of think in 2 languages at once or 3 languages at once. And more recently, the scholar Ofelia Garcia, who has an immense body of research around this, has talked about it's not necessarily just a strategy that we can teach. It's something that happens naturally. Once again, the brain does this naturally, but we want to capitalize it in our classrooms. Ofelia Garcia describes translanguaging as, quote, the deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire. And that is so exciting because, like in Dalila's case, she's got Portuguese, she's got English, she uses all of it at once. And she's able to do that consciously. And we want to empower our students to do it even more explicitly than they might already do. We want to make it really visible, again, as you can see from this example here. And there's different kinds of metalinguistic awareness that students can do. Once again, going back to the Cyrillic version that I shared, it can be at the letter level and the word level. And then we can get, of course, into patterns of speech. We call it the syntactical level. And moving into the bigger pieces of language, like pragmatic awareness around nuances and other pieces that, again, you're going to see in these student examples that we'll share. I wanted to share another example, and this is a shout out to my friends in Lawrence, Massachusetts at a newcomer program, where, as you can see, there's little C's above some of the words. And in this case, the C's stand for cognates, which of course cognates exist in many languages, not just between Spanish and English. But I write about this in the blog too, right? Looking at the root words and understanding the background of certain words can help students. Again, they're not just translating and going to Google Translator or bilingual dictionary, which is fine. It's a good tool, but they're using their brain as their first tool. They're using their brain to say, oh, culture, cultura, cognate, favorite, favorita, favorito, cognate. And they're building those connections, again, consciously in their brain between their home language, in this case, which was Spanish, and learning about Sonia Sotomayor, and bridging to English. When I was a classroom teacher, I had students keep track on the wall of cognates. It was always a student job where somebody got to do that. But also, in building meta-linguistic awareness, I had kids keep track of idioms because of course, idioms are really that pragmatic level of multilingual, of meta-linguistic awareness, where they're very confusing if you don't know, and if it doesn't translate to your language, right? Like, for example, does that ring a bell? We use that all the time, or the drill. And of course, I write about this a lot in my book too, about how important that is for all educators, from the instructional leader of a building all the way down to instructional aides and even office staff, all of us, to understand how, like Dalila said, how culturally loaded language is. So these are again, just some more examples we're going to be sharing more and more with you here of how to do that, but more importantly, why. Okay, so just some final words here from me before I shift to my guest here today. But we know that being multilingual and bilingual is not at all a deficit. It is a major asset. And in this case, shout out to my friends at the Dearborn STEM Academy in Boston, it's a superpower, right? So a very simple thing that you can do if you don't feel equipped to teach meta-linguistic awareness skills and strategies yet, is just, again, learning students' home languages, just greetings here, like bon dia, bonjour, buenos dias, like having them up here with the target languages that you have, as well as for the parents and the families and the guardians that we work with. So I just love this picture that's from this school, that it's a superpower, what's yours? And like, it's not at all, a negative attribute, even though there's a strong history of anti-bilingual education in this country. We actually do not have a common official language. We do not have English as an official language. So we want to encourage students to keep their home language. We want to encourage students who don't have another language to become bilingual, to become multilingual. And so I try to model that as I've done with you here today. And then one final thought here from me is, having worked with kids from over 40 different language groups as a teacher and now as a coach, I think, again, doesn't have to be major things that we do. It's just little adjustments that we can do in our practice. Like, again, looking at sayings or expressions from students' home languages, not just looking at English, but saying, do you have an expression like this in your language? Or do you have an idiom like this in your language? This is from a teacher that I worked with in Winchester, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, where, as you can see, the student is sharing a proverb in Chinese, and it's something that we don't have in English. We don't walk around saying a book holds a house of gold. We might say, don't judge a book by its cover. That has a different meaning. It's very culturally loaded, right? Language is very culturally loaded, as Dalila says. And so with that in mind, I would like to shift it over to Dalila, who's going to talk more in specifics about what this means to her program as an EL director and as a multilingual learner herself.
Thank you, Sarah. So in thinking of meta-linguistic awareness, so what is it? Why do we need to promote it for multilingual learners? So as Sarah was saying, those connections in the brain, I love that. It's the understanding of language. It's understanding how the language functions. And then when you bring in the contrastive analysis, it's making those connections of the languages that you know with the new language coming in and connecting those, comparing and contrasting, because contrasting is just as important as comparing in order to understand the differences that might be happening within the languages. And with all of this, like I had said earlier, it truly values the knowledge that the students have. One thing that I always say in my professional development workshops and such is that students don't come in with a blank slate just because they don't know English. They come in full of knowledge, and that knowledge is just not in the English language. This is what I tell teachers in the SEI endorsement classes that I teach in any type of professional development. So what do? So they have that knowledge. They come in as a 12-year-old with 12-year-old knowledge, just like our English speaking students. So we need to find those mechanisms, those instruction pieces in order to really bridge their knowledge and just code it in the English language, however, connecting it to their language. And this values their knowledge and values their identity. So in the next few slides, what you're going to see is how our department has really embedded this. We have 8 pillars that we really stand by in our department, and one big pillar is meta-linguistic awareness and contrastive analysis. So you will see, I'm going to speak about a couple of these. So this is the first one, the Freyer model that is used consistently in this high school classroom. So you see that they're learning the English word and their definition, paraphrasing, but on the top right, you see that they have their word in their language in that box in order to make sense of that new word that they're learning. So you see it here in Tagalog, and then the next one is in Portuguese with the same word. So then moving on to the next slide, we have an assignment that our high school teachers gave. And I love this quote that Sarah has embedded in here from our teacher, Dora. These assignments were done without translation program assistance. The biggest part is connecting their language, having them connect their language with the English language that they're learning. So Nearpod, we use Nearpod in our classes, and the great thing with Nearpod is that they annotate the text. So in the next slides, you're going to see that this was in Tagalog. So the students really they annotated the words that they understood and the meaning based on their own language and the connections that they made with their first language and the second language, with the English language, sorry. So this part, this was my favorite. This I actually did observe. It was one of my observations by chance. So they had the students translate an English piece into their native language piece. And they then compared what were some cognates that they found with the English language and their own language. What is the meaning? And they kept going back and forth. But then I found the best part was then comparing all their languages. So Spanish, here's the Spanish one, and then they translated it into Spanish. So I think the ones that I observed was French, I believe, and Spanish, I think, were the two that they were comparing and seeing what were the cognates between those two languages and making meaning of it. The kids were so, they were so into the activity, and they were really understanding this piece of text. And this is one thing that with my relationship with Sarah and Sarah coaching us here in Taunton Public Schools is that we don't need a lot of text to understand meaning and to take it to that next level. And bringing in their language and making connections with their language really gets them to understand really not complicated, like really high level text and comprehension at their grade level. And this is why I find that the magic is in this contrastive analysis.
Leela, can I ask you a clarifying question about that?
Sure.
Because I know that one of your pillars, as you said, what all of your language teachers have to do is have contrastive analysis experiences like this. But also you mentioned grade level text. So this text right here, as everybody can see, is from the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. This is not a low level text. This is not a lower lexile than believe this was it 9th and 10th grade in Dora's class?
I believe so. I think so.
Yeah. So high school level text is what you're saying, but you're saying it's not about necessarily doing this with the whole novel per se, but pulling out a slice. How would teachers get started if they wanted to do that? Maybe they do use instructional level text that's lower Lexile level, but they also want to bring in grade level text. How did you get your teachers to that point so that they could do this kind of work?
I think the biggest part was encouraging them that you don't need to take the whole novel. And what is the main, what do you want the students to learn from this novel, and finding pieces within the novel that really portray this and go deeper into the comprehension with just segments of the text. I think it took the burden off of them to do this throughout an entire novel. And I feel once they tried it a little bit, they saw truly the students come alive, because their language, their culture, everything was being connected to what they were learning in school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you could also talk a little bit more before we go to the next example about how Nearpod has been a good tool for this, because I know you and I worked on this greatly when the pandemic started as a way, how do we keep kids engaged online, right? And now that we're back in school, you haven't let go of Nearpod. How has Nearpod specifically helped with contrastive analysis?
Okay, so there are many awesome tools with Nearpod. I think one of the biggest ones with contrastive analysis and meta-linguistic awareness is the annotation part. They really can manipulate with the text. And as you see here, they can insert text, they can highlight, they can draw. And so they know how to use all those tools. Another tool that is used is the immersive reader. So the immersive reader is taking that text, and if the students want to hear it, they can have it read to them. They can translate the text and have it read to them in their native language. They can translate just one word. There's a dictionary there. They can identify adjectives, verbs. So there's many ways to manipulate the text in order to really get the understanding. And I find the best part of it is how they can manipulate and highlight, but yet still have that tool, the immersive reader, to check if they're on the right page and check for understanding.
Yeah, and it wasn't something that came quickly to all teachers, because you're working with teachers K-12, right? And I know there's a question here in the text. Question here in the chat I want to get to too, but this idea of being comfortable with tech tools is a big piece of all teaching now, isn't it? Just because we were all online and we had to, and now we're keeping some of the best tools, but also just teachers making that shift from, it doesn't have to be all English. And also you don't have to know the student's home language, right? It's not about knowing, like this teacher, Dora, doesn't necessarily speak. I know she speaks Portuguese, but I'm not sure she speaks French, Cape Verdean, Creole, all the other languages here as well. I mean, how do you get teachers, or what advice do you have for teachers in Tagalog? How do you get teachers to be comfortable with this process of not just using the tech tools, but encouraging students, making sure that students use their home language, like you said, starting with the student and then going to English. How do we get them there? Because Dora's got exemplary work here, which thanks to Dora for that. We love it. But what if somebody's just getting started in this?
I would start with just something small, just an excerpt, and see what the students can really pick out that is either is the same or different with the languages that they know. So just an excerpt, a paragraph, something small, and start from there. And then from there, then extend it even more for annotating and responding in their own language, and then turning it into the English language. So just seeing how students really need. I think it's a good assessment to see how much of their language do they still need as a scaffold, And so that's a good way to inform your instruction moving forward. What else can you put in place in order to build that English language as far as scaffolds go?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to hear. Thank you. I'm just adding some tips based on what you're saying in the chat. I think too, one of the things that I hear a lot as a coach in different programs is, but my students don't have enough of their home language. In other words, they're coming as adolescents or even as younger students. And it's like, well, they don't have literacy in their home language. And sometimes it's a matter of finding out, do they, right? Sometimes we might make assumptions. Do you have thoughts on that? And how we find that information out?
So, yes, so extensive conversations with the student and the families in order to see where the students are as far as their literacy in their first language. But they do have language, they have their oral language. So that for sure you can connect even sounds, or if you were to read the English language to the text to them, are there any words that sound like words that you know? So just really depending on their listening skills in their native language is something to lean on, because I hear that all the time as well, especially like the early grades. And I get it. I totally get it. But this is why we also talk about the cultural piece and how important that cultural piece is, and making connections with students and their experiences and what have they gone through already before reaching our classrooms.
So it sounds like too, you might suggest when learning about students' backgrounds, acknowledge that they might have an oral proficiency. So for example, in this one, The Most Dangerous Game, the short story that the students did this activity in, they might not know how to say right, sopa, like for soup. But if you say sopa, they might understand it, right? So that's why the immersive reader and other tools are helpful, because you want them to hear and see the words. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Not just about the written language.
Right.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. Yeah, and this story that we have some examples from, I was looking into it because I had not read the story, but it's actually, an adult story. So there's really high level text here that this teacher was able to work with the students on. And so this is pretty typical. This assignment right here is pretty typical, right? Giving them the text like you advised us, and then having the students see what the students can pull out. So this again is what's expected when we give the students text. Yes.
And then what they do is they bring in that prediction. Okay, so now based on this, what do you think is going to be the next? What do you think is going to happen next? Like there are so many other elements that can be brought in at the literacy level once you really get the meaning of just this small part of the text.
That's great. I'm just adding a little thought here as Lori brought a question into the chat. Yeah, Kami is also another tool. There's so many great tech tools out there. I'm constantly trying to stay up to date with them, but I think even Google Docs, allowing students to, like Dalila was saying, color code, comment. Dalila and I've been playing with the feature where students can speak, right? The dictation. So they might not be able to write it, but they can speak it, and then Google will write it for them, will scribe it for them. Like any tech tools that allow for that full language experience can be great. And even letting the kids kick it around. And how would you use this tool, right? We don't have to have all that knowledge ourselves, do we?
No, and I find that to be the most powerful. I worked with 2 newcomer high school students, and I was working with them with the Google Docs, and I said, if we wanted to get to know a student and know what they know, and I said, what do you think about these questions? What do you think about this tech tool? And they gave me so much feedback, and this is where the connections come in. And I find that to be, and part of the questions were like, where was your school? What did it look like? What did you do? And I mean, and they came alive. And this is what I always tell everyone. It's making those connections, asking them the questions, validate what they've gone through before getting here.
I love that. Let's capture that. Yeah, validate students. And what I'm hearing loud and clear is starting with the students and then moving to the story or the content, the standard. we have to do both, right? And
Right.
it's, you get so much farther if you bring students into it versus just sort of like, sort of like when we talk about transmission approach, which was sort of the old school model versus constructivism, right? Like transmission is like, you sit there and I'm going to stand and deliver and you're an empty vessel and I'm going to fill you up with knowledge. We know that's not how the brain works, right? The brain needs connections. The brain needs to be validated. We always want to keep that affective filter down for our language learners.
Mhm.
And do you find that too, that just students are more engaged now in your program now that you require this from your teachers?
Oh, absolutely. And I find that their understanding of high level text is just so much better once they're able to navigate using their language as one of the scaffolds.
And I'll just share too, one of the things that I've seen, and I've worked in many states where, as I mentioned before, there's history and even current policy, around not having bilingual education. And we're not saying you need to have a bilingual education program. That's not always possible. We're dealing with language minorities, like say you have a student from Haiti who speaks and reads and writes in French and Haitian Creole, but you don't have any other students in that language group. And even if you did, you can't always bring in a whole dual language bilingual program. We're not suggesting that. We're suggesting just, again, validating who the students are, the connection from their culture to their language in these small yet meaningful ways. And in my work, having, again, been in many classrooms, and now that the pandemic is wherever it is, visiting more classrooms again and encouraging this to happen, even in non-EL spaces, like in a science classroom that's taught by a general educator or where have you, is letting people know this is important. And sometimes I'll get a reaction like, but I don't know Haitian Creole, or I'm scared that they're not going to learn English, or like I think as ambassadors, those of you listening, many of you are language specialists, we have to do that work, in my opinion, like really, as Dalila's modeling for us, let people know that it's okay and it's important and it works and it accelerates language development. It's like really calling it out, isn't it, Dalila? It's been a mission for you, not just in your district, but all the other work that you do as a teacher educator.
Well, and I feel like Massachusetts, and you often say this so well, Massachusetts was seen as like a subtractive language type of state because of back in 2001, 2. And now it's like, so for a long time, we were not allowed to use any type of language. And it's really changing that mind shift, and making sure that we are advocating for these kids. And one way to advocate is to understand their identity and bring their identity into their learning.
Yeah, I'll just share a story in that line. I was working with a high school yesterday over Zoom, not nearby, but in this country. And the school's a tech school. So we're talking about auto collision classes, culinary, marine biology, engineering, really interesting work, helping those teachers develop this language lens, as I call it. And it's been great because we've been working together all year. And what was so exciting to hear is some of the teachers have been learning basic greetings in their students' languages and going way out of their comfort zones. Like it's something that kids just appreciate, and parents and family members and community members, right? It's like, just try, even if you pronounce it wrong.
Right.
And we're not asking you to master it. We're just asking you to bridge, right? To connect and celebrate.
Right. Yep.
And then again, I think the next step is, okay, now let's do some contrastive analysis. That's where I'm going to go next with them. Like, all right, you got your text, your auto, automotive manual, because they're going to be doing repair work on cars. Okay, let's do a little bit. It doesn't take that long. It doesn't need to be a whole thing. And you don't need to know the students' home languages. It's okay.
Yes, absolutely. But valuing their language and their culture is the most important.
Yes. I love it. I love it. Yes. It's couldn't have said it better myself. So I just want to point out, and I'm going to actually show you, Liz has put it in the chat, and I'm just going to show everybody so you can see. This is a blog that we wrote all about this exact topic. I mentioned looking at cognates. I promised this Venn diagram, which I just think is like the best Venn diagram I've ever seen, to be totally honest with you. It's got the Roman alphabet, the Greek alphabet, that Cyrillic alphabet. and just, wow, look at language. Isn't it amazing? And you want to do a deep dive. There's lots of other things in here that goes further, including, cognates that don't just exist in Latin-based languages. It's about looking at the history of words, right? And equipping students to understand that it all connects, because we've all been connected through human history and through migration. And it's, again, really powerful in many content areas, not just if you're teaching English language development, but helping non-English learners understand language, right? So if thinking about language as meta-linguistic awareness, why can't all students have that, even just in English? So we want to really promote that. And again, feel free to take a look at that, as well as our offering for the summer. Those of you that are language specialists or people that are in a position to support other educators, including non-ELS and other educators in your district, feel free to check this out. It's our Summer Institute. So actually, I'll just throw that in the chat since I'm here. Yeah, thanks, Delina.
I just did it. Yeah,
perfect. Right on the spot. I love it. So that's there for you to consider as well if you're interested. But otherwise, we'd love to open it up for questions, comments, ideas, sharing, and we have a little bit of time left to do that.
All right, I'm hopping back in here. I think as the questions and comments came up, you were kind of addressing them as they popped up. I want to circle back to Robert's question around the Confucian hierarchical, can I say that, education approach. That is something that is a really interesting lens that and Robert asks it a lot. He asks it of all of our presenters. So when we talk about having students from a variety of different countries and bringing in lots of different cultures, in your experience, and this is really for both of you, and Dalila, I know you're working in a district right now, your teachers who are doing the work with students, could you ballpark it? Like, how many of them would you say have been exposed to that East Asian cultural approach to education? Or is it something where the students come in, you look at the students you have in front of you, you get to know them, and you do the work that you need to do to get to know the students as an individual? Does that question make sense? I feel like I'm just talking a lot here, but I'm trying to get Robert an answer to his question around, like, I think, Robert, you can jump in here. Do we need to be prepared? Do all educators need to be prepared and oriented to this particular philosophy that he's referring to sort of ahead of time? Or is this something, do you think we can sort of figure out if we do have a student from an East Asian culture in our classroom? I'll stop talking and let you answer now.
And Sarah, you can help me with this, but I feel as though we really get to know the student and go from there, making the connections with the student and their experiences, and just go, and then meeting the students where they are, and then bringing in the scaffolds needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I agree. And I think there's also, again, as Dalila was talking about earlier, things that we need to know about certain cultural groups as well. And if we don't know, where can we find that information? In my book, I talk about a student, Lilling, who I had, and of course her name's been changed, but one of many students I had who's from China. She's from Southeast part of China. And that was the first student I'd had from that group. And that's, you don't want to generalize, okay, all the students from China are like this, but I did some research to answer the question that was presented. I did some research as a teacher, saying what's different about maybe where her schooling style versus where she came to be educated by me and my colleagues. And what I found was, as Robert was saying, it's a collectivist culture and very hierarchical. And so that explained to me some of the things that she was experiencing, including some nonverbals, like not making eye contact is considered respectful, in certain collectivist cultures and other kinds of cultures. And I know in a lot of professional development, we teach the difference between individualistic and collective cultures because we want people to understand that. But there's so much more, right? There's so much more in terms of nonverbal communication. and understanding that academic language itself is a really loaded term. It's like considered, for certain domains, in certain places in our society, and that we need to be aware that that can just, that can exclude some people, right? And that all languages are valid, and therefore all cultures are valid. So that was a big answer to a big question, but I think, it's both and. We need to learn about students at the individual level, and we need to think about the patterns of diversity and identity groups, and understanding things that might be different from what we're promoting in our schools.
For sure. And I think, Robert says East Asian education is heavily teacher-centered and knowledge is transmitted.
The transmission approach,
So that is something certainly that the educators would need to, be aware of as they're getting to know the individual students in their classrooms. And I think kind of want to zoom out a little bit on this question. And I think it's important that the district and the teachers are, equipped to be able to point staff in the right direction to be able to find out that information, right? So first is like making sure we understand that, yes, as a teacher of multilingual learners, that's part of the work. We need to understand the language, culture, background that the student is bringing into the classroom. And that will require, in some instances, not only talking to families, talking to the students, but perhaps doing a little bit of, learning on your own, right? And so in what direction can I go for information, right? So that's just something that always crosses my mind when Robert answers that question, making sure that that we're equipped to get the answers that we need based on the data and the information we get from the students.
And I also tell my teachers, because I've had a couple of my teachers question that they don't know, and I say it's okay that you don't know. How about asking the students, asking the families, and again doing the research? The teachers don't need to hold all the information, right? And and to empower students to learn, empower students to lead, and to teach us as well as and so I tell teachers, take comfort in that you don't need to know everything, and that research is necessary.
Yes.
Thank you for the question, Robert. We do have a few more minutes, so if you have any final thoughts or questions, go ahead and drop those into the chat or the Q&A. In the meantime, I will let everybody know what is coming up on next week's webinar. We are going to revisit the topic of silos, especially when it comes to special education and students who are multilingual learners or English learners. So this is a topic that we've discussed on previous webinars, but it's always good to come back to it because it's an ongoing challenge, right? Is these siloed departments of special education and English learners, and what if a student needs both? Or there's all sorts of questions and conflict that can come into that depending on the district you're in and the procedures that you have in place. So next Thursday at 12 o'clock Pacific time, 3 o'clock Eastern, we will have Emily Ropers and Edelicia Branzo joining us to discuss this. They have a great framework and great tools and techniques to talk about breaking down those silos so that we are equipped to have those conversations and do what we need to do to make sure that all students are getting the services that they may need. You can register for that on our website. We'll also, of course, send out our weekly emails prompting you to register. Don't forget Saddleback's new Go Decode phonics-based library for tweens is available. Did a webinar on this several weeks ago now. If you need more information on this, go ahead and contact me, contact us at Saddleback. We'll get you samples and get you whatever information you need about these materials. All right, let's check on the questions here. Oh, you're so welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Check the Q&A area. I think looks like we're all wrapped up on questions. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you for the great presentation, Dalila and Sarah. We always enjoy having new presenters on. So this is a great team effort. We had a return presenter and a new presenter. So thank you both for your efforts and for sharing your expertise with us today. This is where you can find Saddleback online. We are on whatever your social platform of choice is. We are most likely there. So check us out. Or if you just prefer to be old fashioned like me and pick up the phone, we got you there. We got you covered there too. So please reach out with any questions that you may have about Saddleback products. And of course, we want to say thank you to everything for everything that you do, right? And especially taking time out of your day to visit with us on these webinars. We appreciate you and your hard work. And thank you once again to our presenters, and we will see everybody next week. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Muito mexe. Gracias. Ciao.
Adeus.